The gunshot that rang through the canyon didn't belong to an outlaw or a lawman, but to a desperate woman shooting at a rattlesnake coiled near the creek where she'd been washing her only dress. And that's when Cole Ashford first saw her, standing knee-deep in the water with a smoking pistol in her trembling hands and hunger written across her face like a wanted poster. It was 1878 in the Arizona Territory, and the town of Silverton sat nestled between copper-red mountains that promised wealth, but delivered mostly dust and disappointment. Cole had ridden in 3 days prior, his saddlebags heavy with money from a cattle drive that had taken him from Texas to Montana and back again. He was 26 years old, broad-shouldered and weathered by sun and hard work, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes the color of creek stones. He'd been heading toward the creek himself when he heard the shot, his hand instinctively moving to his own weapon before he realized the sound came from a small-caliber pistol, the kind a woman might carry for protection. She stood there in the shallow water, her dress soaked and clinging to a frame that was far too thin, her blonde hair falling loose from its pins. The snake lay dead on the rocks, but she was still shaking, still pointing the gun at it as if it might spring back to life. Cole approached slowly, his boots crunching on the dry earth, and when she heard him, she spun around with the pistol raised. Her eyes were blue, pale as a winter sky, and they held a wildness that spoke of too many days without enough food, too many nights spent afraid. "Easy now," Cole said, raising his hands to show he meant no harm. "That snake's dead. You're safe." She lowered the gun slowly, her chest heaving with breaths that came too fast. Up close, he could see the hollowness in her cheeks, the way her collarbone stood out too sharply above the neckline of her faded calico dress. She looked to be about 22 or 23, but hunger and hardship could make people look older than their years. "I didn't mean to cause alarm," she said, her voice carrying the soft vowels of someone raised in the South, maybe Georgia or Alabama. "It was going to strike. I had no choice." "You did right," Cole assured her. He noticed a small basket on the creek bank, half filled with what looked like wild herbs and a few scraggly vegetables. "You live nearby," she hesitated, clearly debating whether to trust him with that information. Her eyes darted to his gun belt, to his face, to the horse waiting patiently behind him. Finally, she nodded toward the far side of the creek. "The old Henderson place. I'm renting the cabin out back." Cole knew the property. The main house had burned down 2 years ago, and all that remained was a small cabin that had once housed ranch hands. It was barely more than 4 walls and a roof, with a fireplace that probably smoked something terrible. "You living there alone?" Again, that hesitation. Then a lift of her chin that tried for defiance but only showed her exhaustion. "I am capable of taking care of myself, as you just witnessed." "Didn't say you weren't," Cole replied. He could see she was about to gather her basket and leave, so he spoke quickly. "Name's Cole Ashford. I'm staying at the boarding house in town for a spell. If you need anything, you can find me there." She studied him for a long moment, those pale blue eyes searching his face for something he couldn't name. Whatever she was looking for, she didn't seem to find it, because she simply nodded once and turned back to the water, bending to retrieve her basket. Cole noticed how carefully she picked through the herbs, how she handled each item as if it were precious. He wanted to ask her name, but something told him she wouldn't give it, not yet. So he tipped his hat, even though she wasn't looking, and led his horse back toward town. But he couldn't stop thinking about her all through dinner at the boarding house, where Mrs. Garrett served up beef stew and fresh bread with butter. He ate more than he needed, his mind on those hollow cheeks and too sharp bones. When Mrs. Garrett came to clear his plate, he asked her about the Henderson place, about who might be living out there. "Oh, that would be Miss Clara Brennan," Mrs. Garrett said, settling into the chair across from him with the ease of a woman who loved to talk. "Poor dear came here about 4 months ago, traveling alone. Said she was a widow, though she looks awful young for that. Took that terrible cabin and paid 3 months rent up front, but that must be running out soon. She does washing and mending for some of the families in town, but work's scarce, and I know she's struggling. Pride won't let her take charity, though. I've tried bringing her food, but she always refuses. Cole absorbed this information, filing it away. She got any family, none that she's mentioned, keeps to herself mostly. It's a shame, really. She's clearly educated, well-bred. Something must have happened back wherever she came from, something that sent her running this far west with nothing but the clothes on her back. Mrs. Garrett leaned forward conspiratorially. I think she's running from something or someone. She jumps at loud noises, and I've seen bruises on her wrists that looked like finger marks, though they're old now. Cole felt something tighten in his chest, a protective anger toward whoever had put those marks there. He thanked Mrs. Garrett for the information and went up to his room, but sleep came slowly. He kept seeing Clara Brennan standing in that creek, trembling and armed and so desperately alone. The next morning, Cole woke with a plan forming in his mind. He'd made good money on the cattle drive, more than enough to see him through the winter and then some. He'd been thinking about settling down somewhere, maybe buying some land and starting his own ranch. Silverton was as good a place as any, better than most. The territory was growing, and there were opportunities for a man willing to work hard. But first, he had something else to attend to. He found Clara in town that afternoon, carrying a heavy basket of laundry that she'd clearly just picked up from one of the houses on the edge of town. She was walking slowly, stopping every few yards to rest, and Cole could see the effort it cost her to lift the basket each time. He rode up alongside her, dismounted, and reached for the basket before she could protest. "Let me help you with that," he said. "I don't need help," Clara replied, but her arms were shaking from the weight. "Maybe not, but I'm offering anyway. Where are you taking it?" She looked like she wanted to argue, but practicality won out over pride. "The McGovern house, 2 streets over." Cole hefted the basket easily and began walking, leading his horse with his other hand. Clara walked beside him, silent and stiff with discomfort. He didn't try to make conversation, just walked at a pace she could match without strain. When they reached the McGovern house, he waited while she went inside to deliver the clean laundry and collect her payment. She emerged a few minutes later with coins clutched in her hand and a slightly less guarded expression on her face. "Thank you," she said quietly. "You're welcome." "Can I walk you home?" She hesitated, then shook her head. "I have more work to do in town, but I appreciate your help, Mr. Ashford." Over the next 2 weeks, Cole found reasons to be wherever Clara was. He helped her carry heavy loads, fixed a broken wheel on the cart she sometimes borrowed, and made sure to greet her whenever their paths crossed. He was careful not to push, not to crowd her, but he wanted her to know she had someone she could count on if she needed help. Slowly, incrementally, she began to relax around him. She started to smile occasionally, a small thing that transformed her face and made Cole's heart beat faster. She told him small details about her life, carefully edited stories that revealed nothing about her past but everything about her character. She was smart, well-read, and had a quiet sense of humor that emerged when she felt safe enough to show it. It was a Tuesday afternoon when Cole stopped by the general store and saw Clara inside, carefully counting out coins to pay for a small bag of flour and some dried beans. The storekeeper, old Mr. Hendricks, was watching her with barely concealed impatience, and Cole could see Clara's cheeks flushing with embarrassment as she realized she was 2 cents short. She started to put the flour back, but Cole stepped forward and placed a silver dollar on the counter. "Add it to my account," he told Hendricks, then looked at Clara. "And put together a decent supply of staples for Miss Brennan here. Flour, sugar, coffee, beans, rice, salt pork, whatever she needs." "No," Clara said immediately, her voice sharp with humiliation. "No, I cannot accept that." "It's not charity," Cole said, keeping his voice calm and gentle. "Consider it payment for services. I need someone to do my mending, and Mrs. Garrett says you're the best seamstress in town. I'll bring my things by your place tomorrow." It was a transparent excuse, and they both knew it. Clara's eyes shone with unshed tears, and for a moment, Cole thought she might bolt from the store entirely. But then she took a breath and nodded once, a jerky movement that acknowledged the fiction they were both maintaining. "Very well. Bring your mending tomorrow afternoon." Cole nodded to Hendricks, who began pulling items from the shelves and packing them into crates. Clara stood rigid and silent, watching as the supplies piled up, far more than Cole's casual order had suggested. When Hendricks named the total, Clara's eyes widened, but Cole paid without comment and arranged to have the crates delivered to the Henderson place that evening. Outside, Clara turned to him with her arms crossed over her chest, defensive and vulnerable all at once. "Why are you doing this?" "Doing what? Being kind to me, helping me. You don't know me. You don't owe me anything." Cole looked at her for a long moment, at the pride and fear warring in her expression, at the way she held herself like someone expecting a blow. "Does there have to be a reason?" "Maybe I just don't like seeing someone go hungry when I have more than enough." "Men don't give without expecting something in return," Clara said, her voice bitter with experience. "Some men don't," Cole agreed, "but I'm not asking for anything you're not willing to give. If you want to do my mending, fine. If you don't, that's fine too. The food's already paid for either way." She stared at him, clearly trying to understand his motives, to find the trap she was certain must be hidden in his generosity. Cole met her gaze steadily, letting her look, letting her see whatever she needed to see. Finally, she nodded again, still wary but slightly less defensive. "I'll do your mending. It's only fair." The next afternoon, Cole rode out to the Henderson place with a small bundle of shirts and trousers that didn't really need mending, but that he deliberately pulled buttons from and torn in inconspicuous places. The cabin was worse than he'd imagined, a rough structure with gaps in the walls that would let in terrible drafts come winter. But Clara had done her best to make it livable. There were wildflowers in a jar on the windowsill, and the small space was scrupulously clean despite its poverty. A narrow bed took up one corner, covered with a quilt that had been mended so many times it was more patches than original fabric. A small table and two rickety chairs constituted the only other furniture, and there was a fireplace where a pot hung over low flames, something simple simmering inside. Clara invited him in with obvious reluctance, and Cole tried to make himself seem smaller, less threatening in the confined space. He handed over his mending, and she examined each piece carefully, her fingers quick and competent as she assessed the work needed. They discussed payment, and Cole offered more than the job was worth, which made Clara's mouth tighten but also made her nod in acceptance. As he was about to leave, she stopped him with a hesitant question. "Would you like some tea? It's nothing fancy, just herbs I gathered, but it's hot." It was an olive branch, a small gesture of trust, and Cole accepted it with care. "That would be nice, thank you." They sat at the little table, drinking tea from mismatched cups, and for the first time, Clara volunteered information about herself without prompting. She'd grown up in Alabama, she told him, on a small plantation that had been lost after the war. Her father had died when she was young, and her mother had remarried a man who seemed kind at first but grew cruel after the wedding. Clara had married to escape that house, but her husband had been worse than her stepfather. She said it matter-of-factly, without self-pity, but Cole could read between the lines. When her husband died in an accident at the rail yard where he worked, Clara had taken what little money there was and run, fearing his family would force her back into a situation she couldn't survive. "I know people think it's strange, a woman alone out here," she said, staring into her tea. "But I'd rather struggle alone than be comfortable and afraid. Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense," Cole said. And it did. He understood choosing hardship over helplessness, freedom over security. He found himself telling her about his own past, things he didn't usually share. His parents had died of fever when he was 15, leaving him and his younger sister alone. He'd worked any job he could find to keep them fed, until his sister married a good man and moved to California. After that, Cole had drifted, working cattle drives and ranch jobs, never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots. He'd been alone for so long he'd forgotten what it felt like to want to stay somewhere, to build something permanent. But sitting in that tiny, drafty cabin drinking herb tea with Clara Brennan, Cole felt something shift inside him. He wanted to stay. He wanted to take care of her, not because she couldn't take care of herself, but because everyone deserved someone in their corner. And maybe, just maybe, she could be the reason he finally stopped drifting. When he left that afternoon, Clara walked him to the door and thanked him for the tea and conversation. Her smile was real this time, reaching her eyes and making them shine like sunlight on water. Cole rode back to town thinking about that smile, about how he could make it happen more often. Over the following weeks, Cole became a regular visitor to the Henderson place. He always brought some excuse. He needed to check on his mending, he'd shot a rabbit and thought she might like some fresh meat. He was riding out that direction anyway and wanted to make sure she was all right. Clara saw through his excuses, but she stopped protesting. She began to expect him, began to have tea ready when he arrived, began to smile when she heard his horse approaching. They talked about everything and nothing, building a friendship on the foundation of shared loneliness and tentative hope. One evening in late October, Cole arrived to find Clara sitting at her table with her head in her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. He was off his horse in an instant, kneeling beside her chair and asking what was wrong. Through tears, she told him that the Henderson family had decided to sell the property. The new owners wanted the cabin torn down, and she had until the end of November to find somewhere else to live. She'd been to every boarding house and rental property in town, but everything was either too expensive or the landlords refused to rent to a woman alone. "I don't know what I'm going to do," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I have nowhere to go. I can't go back to Alabama. I can't." Cole's mind was racing. He could offer to pay for her lodging somewhere, but that would offend her pride and probably frighten her besides. He could help her find work in another town, but the thought of her leaving made his chest ache. Or he could do the thing he'd been thinking about for weeks now, the thing that terrified and thrilled him in equal measure. "You could marry me," he said. The words fell into the small room like stones into a still pond. Clara's head snapped up, her tear-streaked face a mask of shock. "What?" Cole took a breath and committed to the path he'd chosen. "Marry me, Clara. I know it's sudden, and I know you might not feel the same way I do, but I care about you. I want to take care of you. You'd have a home, security, protection. I promise I'd never hurt you, never force you into anything you didn't want. We could take it as slow as you needed." "How you feel," Clara repeated, her voice faint. "Cole, what are you saying?" He reached for her hand, relieved when she didn't pull away. "I'm saying I've fallen in love with you. I know I'm not fancy or educated, and I don't have much to offer except hard work and a decent amount of saved money. But I swear I'd spend every day trying to make you happy, trying to make you feel safe. You wouldn't have to worry about where you'd sleep or where your next meal was coming from. You'd never have to be afraid again." Clara was staring at him with wide eyes, tears still streaming down her face. "You love me." "I do. I know it's fast, but it's true. And if you can't love me back right away, that's all right. Maybe in time you could learn to, maybe." She was shaking her head, but before despair could close around his heart, she spoke. "Cole, I don't need time to learn. I already love you. I think I started falling the first day you helped me carry that laundry when you didn't expect anything in return. I just didn't let myself believe it could be real, that someone like you would want someone like me." The relief that flooded through Cole was so intense it left him dizzy. "Someone like you? Clara, you're the strongest, bravest, kindest person I've ever met. I'm the one who can't believe his luck." And then she was crying again, but this time she was smiling too, and Cole pulled her gently into his arms and held her while she shook with emotion. When she finally pulled back, her face was blotchy and her eyes were red, but she'd never looked more beautiful to him. "Are you sure?" she asked. "Are you absolutely certain you want this?" "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," Cole said. "Will you marry me, Clara?" "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you." They were married 3 days later in a simple ceremony at the small church in Silverton. Mrs. Garrett stood as witness, crying happy tears into her handkerchief, and the pastor's wife played hymns on the piano. Clara wore the only dress she owned, the same faded calico Cole had first seen her in, but he thought she looked like royalty. His hands shook when he slid the simple gold band onto her finger, a ring he'd purchased from the jeweler with care, making sure it was something she could wear forever without it wearing out or turning her finger green. When the pastor pronounced them man and wife and told Cole he could kiss his bride, Cole leaned in slowly, giving Clara every chance to pull away. But she didn't. She met him halfway, her lips soft and tentative against his, and Cole felt like he was holding the entire world in his hands. They spent their wedding night at the boarding house, in Cole's room that suddenly seemed far too small and far too public for what should be a private occasion. Cole could feel Clara's nervousness radiating off her in waves, and he remembered what she'd told him about her first marriage, about her husband's cruelty. So, instead of reaching for her the way his body wanted him to, he sat down in the room's single chair and gestured for her to take the bed. "I meant what I said about taking this slow," he told her gently. "We're married now, which means you're safe and provided for. The rest can wait until you're ready. I'm not going to rush you or push you into anything." Clara sat on the edge of the bed, twisting her new ring around her finger. "That's not how marriage works. You have rights now, expectations." "I have nothing that requires you to be uncomfortable or afraid," Cole said firmly. "Clara, look at me." When she did, he continued, "I didn't marry you to claim some kind of ownership over your body. I married you because I love you, because I want to build a life with you. That life will be better if we build it together, as partners, not if I force you into things you're not ready for." "My first husband didn't see it that way," Clara said quietly. "He said a wife's duty was to submit, regardless of her feelings." Anger burned hot in Cole's chest, but he kept his voice calm. "Your first husband was a fool and a brute. You're my wife now, and that means I'm going to protect you and care for you, including from anything that hurts you or scares you, even if that something is me." Tears welled in Clara's eyes again, but she was smiling. "I don't know what I did to deserve you. You survived," Cole said simply. "You kept going even when things were terrible. That takes courage, Clara. That takes strength. And now you don't have to do it alone anymore." That night they slept in the same bed for the first time, but Cole kept to his side and Clara to hers, with a careful distance between them. But somewhere in the night, Cole woke to find Clara had moved closer in her sleep, her hand resting on his chest. He covered it gently with his own and fell back asleep with a smile on his face. The next week was a flurry of activity. Cole had been looking at properties around Silverton, and now he made his move, purchasing 160 acres of good grazing land about 5 miles outside of town. There was a creek running through it and a stand of cottonwood trees that would provide shade in the brutal summer months. No buildings yet, but Cole had plans. He hired a crew of men and began construction on a house, nothing fancy but solid and well-built, with 3 bedrooms and a real kitchen and a porch that would catch the evening breeze. While the house was being built, he and Clara stayed at the boarding house, but they spent every day at the property, planning and dreaming about their future. Clara bloomed like a flower finally getting enough water. With regular meals and the security of knowing she had a home and a husband who loved her, she began to gain weight, her cheeks filling out and color returning to her complexion. She smiled more, laughed more, and the fear that had haunted her eyes began to fade. She had ideas for the house, for a garden she wanted to plant, for chickens they could raise and maybe a milk cow. Cole listened to every word and made sure to incorporate her wishes into his plans. This was going to be her home and he wanted her to love it. One afternoon, while the house was still under construction, Cole and Clara rode out to the property to check on the progress. The frame was up, and the walls were starting to take shape. Clara walked through the skeleton of rooms, her face alight with excitement as she described how she'd arrange furniture they didn't even own yet. Cole watched her with a contentment he'd never known before. This was what he'd been missing all those years of drifting, this sense of purpose and belonging. They were standing in what would be the kitchen when Clara suddenly went still, her hand flying to her mouth. Cole was at her side in an instant. "What's wrong? Are you feeling ill?" "No, I just realized something," Clara said, her voice strange. "Cole, when was the last time I worried about food? When was the last time I felt hungry and didn't know where my next meal was coming from?" Cole thought about it. "Not since before we married, I'd imagine." "Exactly," Clara said, and now she was crying again, but these were clearly happy tears. "I spent so long being hungry, so long having to make every scrap of food stretch as far as possible. I used to save every bread crust I didn't finish, wrapping them up to eat later when I had nothing else. And now I don't have to do that anymore. I can eat until I'm full, and there will be more food tomorrow and the day after that. Because of you, because you saw me and decided I was worth saving." Cole pulled her into his arms, his own eyes stinging. "You saved yourself, Clara. You got yourself here, kept yourself alive against odds that would have broken a weaker person. All I did was offer you a place to rest. You offered me everything," Clara said against his chest. "You gave me a reason to stop just surviving and start living. I love you so much it terrifies me sometimes." "I love you too," Cole murmured into her hair. "And I promise you, you'll never need to save bread crusts again. You'll never go hungry or cold or afraid, not as long as I'm breathing." They stood there in their half-built house, holding each other as the autumn sun slanted through the unfinished walls, and Cole felt a peace settle over him that he'd been chasing his whole life without knowing it. This was home. Not the land or the house or even the town, but this woman in his arms, this partnership they were building together. That night, back at the boarding house, something shifted between them. Clara came to bed wearing a nightgown Mrs. Garrett had given her as a wedding present, and when Cole climbed in beside her, she moved close instead of keeping her distance. He wrapped an arm around her, and she nestled against his chest with a sigh that sounded like surrender and victory all at once. "I'm ready," she whispered. "I want this to be a real marriage, Cole. I want to be close to you." Cole's heart was pounding, but he kept his voice gentle. "Are you sure? There's no rush, Clara." "I'm sure," she said, and then she kissed him, tentative at first but growing bolder when he responded with careful passion. Cole let her set the pace, let her lead, making sure every touch and kiss was something she welcomed rather than something she endured. When they finally came together, it was slow and tender, with whispered words of love and reassurance. Afterwards, Clara cried again, but when Cole anxiously asked if he'd hurt her, she shook her head fiercely. "No, these are happy tears. I didn't know it could be like this. I didn't know it could be gentle and loving. Thank you for showing me." Cole held her close, stroking her hair until she fell asleep in his arms. He lay awake for a long time, feeling the weight and warmth of her body against his, marveling at the turn his life had taken. A few months ago, he'd been a drifter with no ties and no purpose. Now he had a wife he adored, land to call his own, and a future that stretched out bright and full of promise. The house was finished by mid-November, just as the weather started to turn cold. It wasn't a mansion, but it was well-built and weatherproof, with glass windows and a solid roof and a fireplace that drew properly. Cole carried Clara over the threshold on the day they moved in, both of them laughing, and they spent that first night in their new home christening every room with kisses and joy. The furniture was sparse, mostly things Cole had built himself or purchased secondhand, but Clara made it beautiful with curtains she'd sewn and wildflowers she'd dried and arranged in jars. She planted a winter garden with hardy vegetables that could survive the cold, and Cole built her a chicken coop and filled it with hens that started laying eggs almost immediately. Life settled into a rhythm that felt both comfortable and exciting. Cole spent his days working the land, repairing fences and clearing brush and planning for the cattle he'd buy come spring. Clara kept the house, tended her garden, and took in sewing from women in town who'd heard about her skill with a needle. They worked side by side when the tasks allowed it, and they talked about everything under the sun. Cole learned that Clara loved reading and had taught herself from books her mother had hidden from her stepfather. He began bringing her books from the general store, anything he could find, and she devoured them with hunger equal to what she'd once felt for food. In return, Clara learned that Cole had a beautiful singing voice he was shy about using, and that he loved the stars and could name all the constellations. On clear nights, they'd sit on their porch wrapped in blankets, and Cole would point out Orion and Cassiopeia and the Big Dipper while Clara leaned against his shoulder and listened to him talk about the vastness of the universe and their small but precious place in it. Winter came hard that year, with snow that piled high and winds that howled through the canyon. But the house stood firm, and they had plenty of food laid by and firewood stacked high against the north wall. Cole had never been happier than he was during those long, cold nights with Clara curled up beside him, both of them reading by lamplight or just talking softly about their dreams for the future. It was during one of those conversations that Clara told him she might be pregnant. She said it hesitantly, watching his face for his reaction. Cole felt like the air had been knocked out of his lungs, but in the best possible way. "Are you sure?" "Not completely, not yet, but I'm late and I've been feeling strange in the mornings. I think so, yes." Cole pulled her into his arms, his throat tight with emotion. "A baby, we're going to have a baby." "Are you happy about it?" Clara asked, her voice small. "I know we haven't been married long and we're still getting settled." "Happy, Clara, I'm over the moon." "I'm terrified and thrilled and so grateful I can hardly think straight." He pulled back to look at her, cupping her face in his hands. "You're going to be an amazing mother, and we're going to give this child everything we didn't have growing up. Love, stability, safety, everything." Clara's smile was radiant. "Yes, yes, we are." The pregnancy was confirmed by the doctor in Silverton a few weeks later, and Clara was due in early July. Cole immediately went into protective mode, insisting she not lift anything heavy or work too hard. Clara tolerated his fussing with amused patience, reminding him that women had been having babies since the dawn of time, and she wasn't made of glass. But she also secretly loved the attention, the way Cole would rest his hand on her still flat stomach and talk to the baby about the ranch and the horses and how much they were already loved. Spring brought new life to the ranch in more ways than one. Cole purchased a small herd of cattle and 2 horses, a mare for riding and a gelding for heavy work. Clara's garden exploded with growth, producing more vegetables than they could eat themselves, so she started selling the excess in town. Her sewing business was thriving too, and between that income and the money Cole brought in from odd jobs around the territory, they were doing well. Better than well, actually. They were prospering. As Clara's belly grew, so did Cole's sense of wonder. He'd never thought much about being a father, had never let himself imagine that kind of future. But now it was all he could think about. He started building a cradle in the evenings, carving designs into the headboard with painstaking care. Clara would sit nearby, sewing tiny gowns and blankets, and they'd talk about names and whether the baby would have Clara's blonde hair or Cole's dark eyes. One warm evening in May, they were sitting on the porch watching the sunset when Clara suddenly gasped and grabbed Cole's hand, pressing it to her rounded stomach. "Feel that? The baby's kicking." Cole felt a flutter against his palm, then a stronger thump, and his eyes widened. "That's our baby." "That's really our baby in there." "That's really our baby," Clara confirmed, laughing at his expression. "Strong little thing, too, takes after the father." They sat there as the sky turned from gold to pink to purple, feeling their child move and kick, and Cole thought about how far they'd both come. Less than a year ago, Clara had been alone and starving, and he'd been a drifter with no direction. Now they had each other, a home, a future. It was more than he'd ever dared to hope for. The summer heat came early that year, and as Clara's due date approached, Cole became increasingly anxious. He'd arranged for the doctor to come out to the ranch when her time came, and he'd stocked up on everything the doctor said they'd need. But he couldn't shake the fear that something would go wrong, that he'd lose her or the baby or both. Clara sensed his worry and did her best to reassure him, but he could see she was nervous too. On a sweltering afternoon in mid-July, Clara's labor began. Cole sent one of the ranch hands racing into town to fetch the doctor while he stayed with Clara, holding her hand and trying not to fall apart as she worked through the contractions. The doctor arrived within 2 hours, a gruff but competent man named Henderson who shooed Cole out of the bedroom and told him to make himself useful by boiling water and gathering clean linens. The labor lasted through the night and into the next morning, and Cole paced the floor until he wore a path in the wood. Every cry from Clara tore at him, and he felt utterly helpless, unable to do anything except pray and wait. Finally, as the sun climbed toward noon, he heard a new sound, the thin, angry wail of a newborn baby. Cole's knees nearly buckled with relief. Dr. Henderson emerged a few minutes later, wiping his hands on a towel and smiling. "Congratulations, Mr. Ashford, you have a healthy baby boy. And your wife did wonderfully. She's tired, but she's just fine." Cole barely heard anything past baby boy. He had a son. He was a father. He stumbled into the bedroom where Clara lay propped against pillows, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in a blanket. She looked up at him with tears streaming down her face and the most beautiful smile he'd ever seen. "Come meet your son," she said softly. Cole approached the bed like he was walking on sacred ground. He looked down at the baby in Clara's arms, at the tiny scrunched-up face and the shock of dark hair and the minuscule hands waving in the air, and felt his heart crack wide open. "He's perfect," Cole whispered. "You're perfect. Clara, you did so well. I'm so proud of you. Do you want to hold him?" Clara asked. Cole nodded, not trusting his voice, and Clara carefully transferred the baby into his arms. Cole had never held something so small, so fragile. The baby, their son, blinked up at him with unfocused blue eyes, and Cole fell completely, irrevocably in love for the second time in his life. "What should we name him?" Clara asked. They discussed names endlessly, but now that the baby was here, real and perfect in theirs, Cole knew exactly what felt right. "What about Samuel, after my father? Samuel Cole Ashford." Clara's eyes shone with fresh tears. "Samuel, I love it. Hello, Samuel. Welcome to the world, little one." The next few weeks were a blur of sleepless nights and endless feedings, of learning how to care for a tiny human who seemed determined to cry at the most inconvenient times. But there was also overwhelming joy, the kind that made the exhaustion worthwhile. Cole would wake in the night to feed the baby while Clara rested, and he'd sit in the rocking chair he'd built and hold Samuel against his chest, marveling at the miracle of his existence. This tiny person was half him and half Clara, a perfect blend of both of them, and Cole would protect him with his dying breath. Clara proved to be a natural mother, patient and nurturing despite her own exhaustion. She sang to Samuel in a soft, sweet voice, and she'd tell him stories about the ranch and the animals and all the adventures they'd have when he was older. Cole would listen from the doorway, his heart so full it felt like it might burst. As Samuel grew from a newborn into an infant, the ranch continued to thrive. Cole hired a couple of hands to help with the cattle and the daily operations, which gave him more time to spend with his family. Clara's garden produced bountifully, and she taught Cole how to preserve the harvest for winter. They canned vegetables and made jams, working side by side in the kitchen while Samuel napped in his cradle nearby. Life wasn't always easy. There were hard days when the work seemed endless and money was tight. There were moments when Clara struggled with the isolation of ranch life, missing the company of other women. There were times when Cole worried about drought or disease affecting the herd, about whether he was making the right decisions for his family's future. But through it all, they had each other. They'd learned to talk through problems, to support each other through difficulties, to celebrate victories together no matter how small. One evening in late autumn, when Samuel was about 4 months old, Cole came in from the barn to find Clara in the kitchen preparing dinner. She'd laid Samuel in his cradle near the table where she could see him, and she was humming as she worked, her hands quick and competent as she kneaded dough for bread. Cole stood in the doorway watching her, struck by how different she looked from the frightened, half-starved woman he'd met at the creek just over a year ago. She was healthy now, vibrant, her blonde hair gleaming in the lamplight and her face peaceful and content. As if sensing his gaze, Clara looked up and smiled. "Supper's almost ready. How are the cattle?" "Fine. Everyone's settling in for winter." Cole crossed to the cradle and looked down at Samuel, who was awake and staring up at the ceiling with the serious expression babies sometimes had. "How's this little man been?" "Good. He ate well and had a nice long nap. I think he might be getting teeth soon, though. He's been fussing more than usual." Cole reached down and lifted Samuel out of the cradle, settling the baby against his shoulder. Samuel immediately grabbed a fistful of Cole's shirt and made a contented gurgling sound. "Hear that, Clara? He's already learning ranch work. Hanging on tight is an important skill." Clara laughed, that wonderful sound that still made Cole's heart skip. "Is that what he's doing?" "And here I thought he was just trying to eat your shirt." "That too," Cole agreed. He walked over to where Clara was working and slipped his free arm around her waist, pulling her close so the three of them formed a tight unit. "I love you," he said, kissing the top of her head. "Both of you." "All of this, I just wanted you to know that." Clara leaned into him, her hands resting over his on her waist. "I love you too, so much. Sometimes I think about where I was a year ago, how desperate and afraid I was, and I can't believe how much has changed. You saved my life, Cole." "You saved mine too," Cole said quietly. "I was just drifting before I met you, going through the motions without any real purpose. You gave me a reason to settle down, to build something permanent. You made me want to be better, to deserve you." "You deserve everything good," Clara said fiercely, turning in his arms to face him. Samuel protested the movement, and they both laughed. "You're the best man I've ever known, Cole Ashford. Our son is so lucky to have you as his father." "And he's lucky to have you as his mother," Cole replied. He kissed her then, a soft, lingering kiss that held all the love and gratitude he felt. Samuel, caught between them, made a squeaking noise that might have been approval or might have been hunger. They broke apart laughing, and Clara took the baby to nurse while Cole finished preparing dinner. As they ate, talking about their day and making plans for the week ahead, Cole felt that same sense of peace and rightness he'd experienced when he'd first held Clara in their half-built house. This was what life was supposed to be. Not easy, not without challenges, but full of love and purpose and the quiet joy of building something together. The years began to pass, each one bringing new changes and new blessings. Samuel grew into a bright, curious toddler with his father's dark hair and his mother's blue eyes. He learned to walk by pulling himself up on the furniture, and he said his first word on a cold January morning. It was "Mama," which made Clara cry happy tears, though Cole pretended to be offended until Samuel's second word was "Papa." When Samuel was 2, Clara told Cole she was pregnant again. This time, Cole was less terrified and more excited, though he still fussed over her and made sure she didn't overwork herself. The pregnancy was easier than the first, and in the spring of 1882 they welcomed a daughter into the family. They named her Rose, after Clara's mother, and she came into the world with a head full of blonde fuzz and lungs that could wake the dead. Samuel was fascinated by his baby sister, constantly wanting to help with her care. Cole would find him sitting by Rose's cradle, telling her stories in his limited toddler vocabulary about the horses, and the cattle and the dog they'd gotten the previous summer. Clara would watch them with tears in her eyes, still amazed at the family they'd built, at the life they'd created from nothing but hope and hard work. The ranch continued to grow. Cole expanded the herd and built a proper barn, then added a bunkhouse for the ranch hands. Clara's garden became famous in Silverton for its produce, and she started selling not just vegetables, but also her preserves and baked goods. Between the ranch income and Clara's business, they were comfortable, able to save money and even splurge occasionally on luxuries like new furniture or books or toys for the children. But more than the material success, it was the emotional richness of their life that Cole treasured. Every evening, no matter how tired he was, he'd come in for dinner, and they'd eat as a family, talking and laughing. After the children were in bed, he and Clara would sit on the porch as they had when they were first married, talking about their day and their dreams and marveling at how blessed they were. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Cole took Clara into town for a rare night out. Mrs. Garrett agreed to watch the children, and Cole treated his wife to dinner at the hotel restaurant, the fanciest place in Silverton. Clara wore a new dress she'd sewn for the occasion, a beautiful blue thing that matched her eyes, and Cole wore his best suit. They felt like royalty, sitting at a table with a white cloth and real china, being served courses they couldn't even name. After dinner, they walked through town hand in hand, looking in shop windows and talking about nothing important. It was full dark when they finally headed back to collect the children, and the stars were brilliant overhead. Cole stopped and pulled Clara close, dancing with her there in the middle of the street with no music except the wind and the distant sound of a piano from the saloon. "Happy anniversary, Clara," he murmured against her hair. "Happy anniversary," she replied. 5 years, it seems like forever and no time at all." "Here's to 50 more," Cole said. "At least 50, Clara agreed. They were still dancing when a group of cowboys rode past, whooping and hollering on their way to the saloon. One of them called out a teasing comment about lovebirds, but Cole just waved and kept dancing with his wife. Let them tease. He had everything he'd ever wanted right here in his arms. When Samuel was 5 and Rose was 3, Cole began teaching his son about ranch work. Samuel took to it naturally, unafraid of the horses and curious about everything from branding to fence repair. Rose, meanwhile, showed an early aptitude for growing things, helping her mother in the garden and learning the names of every plant and herb. Cole and Clara would watch their children play and work and grow, constantly amazed at the people they were becoming. Life wasn't without its hardships. There was the year the drought killed half their herd, and the winter when illness swept through Silverton and they had to quarantine the ranch to protect the children. There were arguments and disagreements, times when Cole and Clara didn't see eye to eye and had to work through their frustrations. But they'd learned to communicate, to compromise, to remember that they were on the same team fighting the same battles. Every hardship they weathered together only made them stronger. One afternoon when Cole was out mending fence line, Samuel working beside him with the serious concentration of a child trying to help, they heard a rider approaching fast. It was one of the ranch hands, bringing news that Clara had sent him. She needed Cole back at the house immediately. Cole's heart lurched with fear, and he grabbed Samuel and rode hard for home, imagining every possible disaster. But when he burst through the door, he found Clara sitting calmly at the kitchen table with Rose on her lap and a strange woman sitting across from her. The woman looked to be about 40, well-dressed and nervous, and she jumped when Cole and Samuel came charging in. "Cole, it's all right," Clara said quickly, seeing his panic. "Nothing's wrong. This is Lillian Brennan. She's my cousin from Alabama." Cole tried to process this information. He'd known Clara had family back east, but she'd never mentioned being in contact with them. He set Samuel down and approached cautiously. "Ma'am." Lillian stood and offered her hand, her smile uncertain. "Mr. Ashford, I'm sorry to appear unannounced like this. I've been trying to find Clara for years, and I finally traced her here. I hope I'm not intruding." "You're not intruding at all," Clara said warmly. "Lillian is my mother's sister's daughter. We grew up together before the war. I had no idea she was looking for me." Over tea and cake, the story came out. Lillian had married well and moved to Philadelphia, losing touch with her southern relatives during and after the war. When she'd heard about Clara's mother's death and Clara's subsequent marriage and disappearance, she'd felt terrible guilt for not being there to help. She'd hired a detective to track Clara down, worried that something terrible had happened to her. "I had to know you were all right," Lillian said, tears in her eyes. "You were like a sister to me, Clara. When I learned your husband had died and you'd vanished, I feared the worst." "I'm more than all right," Clara assured her, squeezing Lillian's hand. "I'm happy, Lillian, truly happy. Cole saved my life in more ways than one, and we've built a wonderful life here." Lillian stayed for 3 days, getting to know Cole and the children and hearing the whole story of how Clara and Cole had met and married. She was impressed by the ranch and delighted by her young cousins, and before she left, she made Clara promise to stay in touch. She also left a substantial sum of money, an inheritance from Clara's mother that had been held in trust and that Lillian had been trying to deliver for years. The money was enough to make a real difference. Cole and Clara discussed at length what to do with it, and they finally decided to use it to expand the ranch significantly and to set aside a trust for their children's education and futures. But they also donated some to the church in Silverton to help other families who might be struggling the way Clara once had. "I remember what it was like to be hungry and desperate," Clara said. "If we can help someone else avoid that feeling, we should." So they funded a program at the church to provide food and temporary housing for families in need, especially women alone with children. Mrs. Garrett helped run it, and Clara volunteered when she could, cooking meals and offering kindness and hope to people who needed it most. Cole was so proud of his wife he could hardly speak, watching her give to others from the abundance they'd been blessed with. As the children grew older, Cole and Clara made sure to tell them their story, age-appropriate versions at first and then more details as they matured. They wanted Samuel and Rose to understand that love could bloom even in the hardest soil, that kindness could change lives, that choosing compassion over cruelty made all the difference. Samuel, serious and thoughtful, took the lessons to heart. Rose, sunny and generous, started helping in the garden program at the church as soon as she was old enough, insisting that everyone deserved fresh vegetables. On Samuel's 10th birthday, Cole took him on his first real cattle drive, a week-long trip to move part of their herd to better grazing land. It was a rite of passage, a chance for father and son to work together as equals for the first time. Around the campfire at night, Cole told Samuel stories about his own childhood, about the loneliness and the struggle and the years of drifting. And he told him about the day he met Clara, about how she'd been standing in that creek with a smoking pistol and hollow cheeks and more courage than anyone he'd ever met. "I knew right then she was someone special," Cole said, staring into the flames. "I didn't know I'd marry her or that we'd have you and your sister, but I knew I wanted to help her. And helping her ended up being the thing that helped me. Sometimes the best thing you can do for yourself is to do something good for someone else." Samuel absorbed this wisdom with the gravity of youth. "I want to be like you when I grow up, Papa, strong and kind and someone people can count on." Cole's throat tightened. "You're already all those things, son. You're going to be a better man than I ever was." When they returned from the drive, Clara hugged them both fiercely, and Rose demanded all the details. They sat around the dinner table that evening, the four of them, and Cole looked at his family with the same wonder he'd felt the first time he held Samuel. Every day with them was a gift, every moment precious. The years continued to roll by, bringing change and constancy in equal measure. The ranch prospered, becoming one of the most successful operations in the territory. Samuel grew into a fine young man, taking on more and more responsibility until he was essentially Cole's partner in running the ranch. Rose developed her mother's skill with plants and textiles, creating beautiful things with her hands and selling them in town to save money for her future. When Samuel was 18, he met a girl at a church social, the daughter of another ranching family. Her name was Emma, and she was sweet and smart and completely smitten with the serious young man who treated her like she was made of spun gold. Clara and Cole watched the courtship with knowing smiles, remembering their own unlikely beginning. When Samuel asked Emma to marry him and she said yes, the families celebrated together, thrilled to unite two ranching dynasties. The wedding was held at the Ashford Ranch in the spring, with half of Silverton in attendance. As Cole watched his son marry his sweetheart under an arch of flowers Clara and Rose had woven, he felt the circle of life completing itself. He reached for Clara's hand and she squeezed back, both of them crying happy tears. "Our baby is all grown up," Clara whispered. "He is, and he's marrying a good woman like his father did." "You're still the best decision I ever made," Clara said, turning to look at him with those blue eyes that still made his heart race even after all these years. "Second best," Cole corrected. "The best decision you made was shooting that rattlesnake. If you hadn't, I might never have found you." Clara laughed through her tears. "I suppose that's true. Thank God for that snake." They built a house for Samuel and Emma on the ranch, close enough to be part of the family operation but far enough to give the young couple privacy. Within a year, they welcomed Cole and Clara's first grandchild, a little girl they named Clara after her grandmother. Clara the elder cried for an hour straight when Samuel told her the name, and Cole had to excuse himself to the barn because he was dangerously close to crying himself. Rose married a few years later, a banker's son from Silverton who loved books as much as she did. They moved into town but visited the ranch every Sunday for dinner, a tradition that continued for years. She gave Cole and Clara two more grandchildren, twins boys who were absolutely fearless and kept everyone on their toes. As Cole and Clara entered their 50s, they gradually stepped back from the day-to-day operations of the ranch, letting Samuel and the foreman handle most of the work. They spent their days in the garden, on the porch, taking long rides across the property they'd built together. They spoiled their grandchildren shamelessly and hosted family dinners that were loud and chaotic and perfect. One evening, sitting on their porch watching the sunset as they'd done countless times before, Clara turned to Cole with a soft smile. "Do you remember the day we met? Every detail," Cole said. "You were the most beautiful, terrifying thing I'd ever seen." "I was half-starved and half-wild," Clara corrected. "Exactly, beautiful and terrifying." Cole pulled her close, settling her against his side. "I knew that day that you were going to change my life. I just didn't know how completely." "I was so afraid of you at first," Clara admitted. "Afraid of your kindness, afraid it would turn out to be a trick or a trap. I'd been hurt so badly I didn't think I could trust anyone ever again. But you did trust me, eventually." "I did, because you were patient and you never demanded more than I could give. You let me come to you in my own time." Clara looked up at him, her face lined with age but still beautiful to him. "You saved my life, Cole, not just by providing food and shelter but by showing me that love didn't have to hurt, that I could be cherished instead of controlled. You gave me back myself." "And you gave me a reason to stop running," Cole replied. "You gave me a home, a family, a purpose. Everything good in my life traces back to you, Clara, every single thing." They sat in comfortable silence as the sky turned from gold to pink to deep purple, the stars beginning to emerge one by one. Cole thought about the long journey that had brought them to this moment, all the struggles and joys and ordinary miracles of their shared life. He thought about Clara saving those bread crusts, trying to make every scrap of food last, and his promise that she'd never need to do that again. He'd kept that promise and so many others. "You know what I'm grateful for," Clara said suddenly. "What's that?" "That rattlesnake. That terrible, terrifying snake that made me fire a shot that brought you running. Without it, we might never have met. You might have ridden past that creek and I might have faded away to nothing in that awful cabin, and none of this would exist." She gestured to the ranch, to the house, to the whole life they'd built. Cole chuckled. "That's a strange thing to be grateful for. Strange but true." Everything good that's happened to us happened because of one moment, one choice to investigate a gunshot instead of riding away. That's what love is, I think. A series of choices to move toward someone instead of away from them, even when it might be easier to keep going. You're getting philosophical in your old age, Cole teased. I'm getting honest in my old age, Clara corrected. And honestly, Cole Ashford, I would live this life 1,000 times over if it meant ending up right here with you. Only 1,000. I was hoping for at least 1,000,000. Clara laughed that wonderful laugh that he'd fallen in love with all those years ago, and Cole kissed her there on the porch as the first stars appeared overhead. They were older now, grayer and slower, but the love between them burned as bright as it had on their wedding day. Maybe brighter because it had been tested and proven over decades of shared life. The grandchildren came running up then, breathless and excited about some adventure in the barn, and the moment of quiet reflection passed. But that was all right. They'd have more such moments, countless more evenings to sit and remember and be grateful. That was the gift of the life they'd built together, time. Time to love, time to raise a family, time to watch their legacy grow and flourish. As Cole watched Clara gather the grandchildren for the walk back to Samuel's house, her face alight with joy as she listened to their chatter, he sent up a silent prayer of thanks. Thanks for the rattlesnake that had brought them together, for Clara's courage in surviving long enough for him to find her, for his own impulse to help a stranger in need. Thanks for every meal shared, every sunrise watched, every child raised, every hardship overcome. Thanks for love that had transformed two broken, lonely people into a family, into a legacy, into a testament to the power of choosing kindness over cruelty, hope over despair, together over alone. He'd told Clara she'd never need to save food again, and he'd meant it as a promise of provision and security. But it had become so much more than that. It had become a promise that she'd never face anything alone again, that they'd meet every challenge together, that abundance of food, of love, of family, of joy would be their legacy. And they'd kept that promise, both of them, every single day for more than 30 years. As the sun dipped below the horizon and the stars claimed the sky, Cole walked toward his family, toward the house they'd built, toward the life they'd created from nothing but hope and hard work and love. And he knew, with the certainty that only comes from a lifetime of proving it true, that every choice that had led him to Clara had been the right one. Every moment of their life together had been a gift, and if he had it all to do over again, he wouldn't change a single thing. The next morning dawned clear and beautiful, the kind of spring day that made everything seem possible. Cole woke to find Clara already up and dressed, standing at the window watching the sunrise. He came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "Everything, nothing, how lucky we are, how much I love our life." She turned in his arms and smiled up at him. "How much I love you." "I love you too," Cole said and kissed her forehead. "Ready for another day in paradise, always," Clara replied. And they were. Ready for another day, another year, another decade of the life they'd chosen together. Ready for grandchildren's birthdays and harvest seasons and Sunday dinners and quiet evenings on the porch. Ready for whatever joys and challenges lay ahead, because they'd face them together, just as they'd faced everything else. Years continued to pass, bringing more grandchildren and eventually great-grandchildren. The ranch stayed in the family, passed down through the generations with the understanding that it represented more than just land and cattle. It represented a promise kept, a legacy of love and hard work, and the belief that kindness could change the world one person at a time. Cole and Clara grew old together, their hair turning white and their steps slowing, but their love never diminishing. They celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. A house full of noise and laughter and the chaos of a family that knew it was loved. When asked for the secret to a long and happy marriage, Cole simply smiled and said, Find someone worth staying for, then choose them every single day, Clara added, and never forget where you came from. Never forget what it felt like to be hungry or scared or alone. That gratitude for what you have will sustain you through anything. On a warm summer evening when they were both well into their 70s, Cole and Clara sat on their porch for the last time together. They'd been married for 52 years, and every day had been exactly what Cole promised that afternoon in the tiny cabin. Clara had never gone hungry again, never been cold or afraid or alone. She'd been cherished and protected and loved beyond measure, and she'd given all those things back to him in equal measure. Cole died peacefully in his sleep that night, holding Clara's hand as he'd held it thousands of times before. Clara followed him just 3 months later, her family said from a broken heart, though the doctor put down natural causes. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch, under a cottonwood tree they'd planted together in their first year of marriage. The headstones were simple, giving names and dates, but Samuel added a plaque between them that told their real story. It read, "Here lie Cole and Clara Ashford, who found each other when they were both lost and built a legacy of love that will endure for generations." He promised she would never need to save food again. She promised he would never be alone again. They kept their promises. And they had. Every day, in every way that mattered, they had kept their promises to each other. The ranch continued to thrive under Samuel's management, and eventually his children's, a testament to the foundation Cole and Clara had built. The family stayed close, bound together by the stories of how their matriarch and patriarch had met, fallen in love, and created something beautiful from nothing but courage and kindness. Every Sunday, when the family gathered for dinner, someone would tell the story of the rattlesnake at the creek, of the cowboy who stopped to help a desperate woman, of the promise that she'd never need to save bread crusts again. And every time the story was told, the listeners would be reminded that love wasn't just a feeling, it was a choice, made over and over again in big moments and small ones. It was seeing someone's need and choosing to help. It was building a home together, raising children together, facing hardships together. It was keeping promises even when it was hard, especially when it was hard. The story of Cole and Clara became family legend, passed down through the generations with the same care that Clara had once passed down her recipes, and Cole had passed down his knowledge of the land. It became a measuring stick for love, a reminder that real romance wasn't just the butterflies and the passion, though those were wonderful. Real romance was choosing your person every day, building a life together one decision at a time, keeping your promises even when decades had passed. Their great-great-grandchildren would eventually inherit the ranch, and they'd walk the land that Cole and Clara had claimed from the wilderness. They'd sleep in bedrooms that bore the marks of generations of family, and they'd eat vegetables from a garden that still followed Clara's original design. And sometimes, on clear evenings, they'd sit on the porch, replaced many times but always in the same spot, and look up at the stars, and they'd think about the cowboy and the desperate woman who'd met by chance and changed each other's lives forever, because that's what love does. It changes everything. It takes two separate stories and weaves them together into something stronger than either could have been alone. It takes hunger and loneliness and fear and transforms them into abundance and companionship and courage. It takes a gunshot at a rattlesnake and turns it into a life, into a family, into a legacy that outlasts the bodies that created it. Cole had promised Clara she'd never need to save food again, and he'd kept that promise with every meal, every harvest, every moment of security he provided. But the real gift wasn't the food. The real gift was the love, the partnership, the knowledge that she was valued and cherished and safe. That was what had truly nourished her, what had taken a half-starved, frightened woman and helped her bloom into the strong, confident matriarch she became. And Clara had given Cole gifts just as precious. She'd given him a home, not just a house, but a sense of belonging. She'd given him children and grandchildren and a reason to build something permanent. She'd given him the knowledge that he was loved not for what he could provide, but for who he was. She'd chosen him every day, and that choice had made him into the man he'd always wanted to be. Their story wasn't complicated. It was just a cowboy and a woman who needed help, who found love in the most unlikely place, who built a life together through hard work and determination and unwavering commitment to each other. It was simple and it was profound, ordinary and extraordinary all at once. And in the end, that's what every great love story really is. It's two people choosing each other over and over again through all the seasons of life. It's promises made and promises kept. It's seeing someone at their lowest point and offering them a hand up, not because you expect anything in return, but because it's the right thing to do. It's building something together that's greater than either of you could have built alone. Cole and Clara's story lived on long after they were gone, a testament to the power of love and kindness and choosing hope over despair. And somewhere, in the vast Arizona sky they'd loved so much, perhaps they were together still, watching over the family they'd created and the legacy they'd left behind, satisfied with the life they'd built from nothing but a chance meeting and a promise that changed everything. The cowboy had noticed she saved every bread crust left, and he'd said she would never need to save food again. And she hadn't. But more than that, she'd never needed to save pieces of love or scraps of affection or crumbs of kindness. Because Cole had given her everything abundantly and freely for the rest of their days, and she had given him the same in return. That was their legacy. That was their love story, and it was, in every way that mattered, perfect.